no mai to the very first episode of Branching Out, Reflections on Indigenous Forestry with Greg Stewart and others. I'm your host, Ki Taurangi, a researcher at Scion, and I'm excited about what we're about to embark on. Branching Out is our brand new podcast where we will be interviewing experienced researchers in the species that are Indigenous to Aotearoa. We will be delving into their knowledge and experiences in the world of Indigenous trees and plants. These people have dedicated their lives to studying and nurturing plants that are native to these shores. They will provide us with valuable insights and knowledge for future, emerging and current researchers in this field. This podcast will be a series of interviews with some amazing people to amplify their voices, capture their perspectives, and share their experiences for our audiences. So we've chosen to chat with Greg Stewart as our primary interviewee. This is because he has over 50 years of experience in Indigenous forestry, with a vast amount of knowledge and wisdom that he's really keen to share. Here with me is Jonathan, the portfolio leader who started this podcast. So tell us a bit about yourself and the inspiration for this podcast.
Kia ora. As a portfolio leader here at Scion, my responsibility is to provide thought leadership and lead a program of research about wood products from Indigenous trees. So Greg is now emeritus here at Scion, and he's always enthusiastic to support the work that we do and to help mentor others into roles in Indigenous research. So this is an opportunity to learn from his vast knowledge and experience and to capture that knowledge and to share with others. So for me, that's the first purpose, to capture the gems from someone who's been so dedicated to the field. The second purpose was really to motivate and inspire future and emerging researchers in the field. Over recent years, we have heard of the gaps in Indigenous research and at the same time, the potential innovation that we could create from Indigenous species. Especially in some of the strategic documentation, we'd seen how there was a lot of support for Indigenous research, but we also wanted to see more investment into this space. So we wanted to use this opportunity to talk to people like Greg and to hear from him, from people who are so immersed in the field. And we're fortunate that Greg has been supportive of up-and-coming researchers, whether they're established within the field like yourself, or just inquisitive and wanting to join and see what Indigenous research is about. So for me, I'm hoping that this podcast is a gateway for those future and emerging researchers.
So we know that Scion has substantial expertise in Indigenous research that we can draw on. Do you think that we will ask others to interview as well?
Yeah, for sure. I think of others from places like Tane's Tree Trust or other organisations that would be great to interview. We're starting with Greg in the first instance, and we'll start branching out from there.
Most of our content is focused towards scientific research. Is that deliberate?
To some extent, yes. Scion is a Crown Research Institute that's focused on science and research. While we're increasingly creating a translation space between mātauranga and science, we acknowledge that mātauranga belongs to iwi, hapu and whānau. Through the podcast, we will acknowledge this and intend to include mātauranga holders and Māori researchers in the podcast. So there's certainly a space for this on our podcast, but we are mindful that we are only holding the space insofar as iwi, hapu and whānau allow us to share their mātauranga. So we've got a range of topics that we want to cover on this podcast. Maybe we should share some of them.
Yep. So our first topics are an introduction to Indigenous species. So we will be asking why native trees are important. We'll be covering a modern history of Indigenous forestry and the state of forests, forestry and ngāhere in Aotearoa.
We also want to cover current issues in Indigenous forests and forestry and to uncover what are the emerging topics for research.
So as a practitioner in this field, I'm also keen to learn from Greg and others about what techniques and methods we should be learning. What are the critical things that future and emerging researchers should be learning?
Going back to your question before too, we know that Greg understands the importance of mātauranga, so we can get his view of where mātauranga and science are converging and creating innovation. And talking with some of our science researchers too, we know from a values base that there are other cultural approaches to forests and forestry that are similar to our Māori approach. So I'm quite keen to understand those values and practices as well, because it's an opportunity to learn across cultures.
Yeah, and we also plan to work through some specific topics like propagation, establishment, transition forestry, provenance, eco-sourcing. And we're also very interested in where Indigenous forestry can fit within a discussion about the circular bioeconomy and what productive Indigenous forestry might mean.
Yeah, absolutely. Any approach to productive Indigenous forestry will be different to how we view and approach productive plantations of pine. So the question is how we can sustainably approach productivity from Indigenous species, whether we're talking about food forests, selective harvesting, or other types of provisions from the forest.
Our first episode will be with the legendary Greg Stewart, which we plan to release this spring. So stay tuned with us on Branching Out, our new podcast where we will be sharing experiences, expertise, and knowledge on Indigenous species. Thank you for listening, and we hope you enjoy this podcast as much as we do. This is Branching Out, signing off.